Hello and welcome to the crux of medtech. We go beyond the buzzwords, bringing you the insights from the innovators, investors, and leaders who are driving this life-saving space forward. Because I'm absolutely fascinated by the stories that people have to tell in medtech. As someone who works in this sector on a daily basis, I come across so many interesting people and so many interesting stories that I think the world deserves to know about. Welcome to the crux of medtech.
Hello, Todd, and welcome to the Crux of MedTech podcast.
Good morning. Actually, good morning for me. Good afternoon for you. Good to see
Good afternoon for me for sure. So I wanted to open with a question. So one of the things that's unique about you is that you actually went from being a customer of Accuryn, someone who brought the technology into your own hospital before you saw what it could do, and you became the company's CEO in a matter of weeks in that timeline. For me, that's not a typical career move. But what was the moment that you thought, I can't just buy this product, I need to go and run this company?
when I experienced being a customer internally, I I really watched the distinction between how early med tech companies think and behave versus how hospitals think and behave. And you and I both get to interact with so many med tech companies. And in my innovation roles, I'd interacted with hundreds over the years. And it hit me one day that I thought, all of my experiences inside of a hospital system, buying products from the outside could be very valuable to an earlier stage med tech device company, and especially one that I've been a customer of. And so it kind of hit me then when I watched how I thought it should work versus how it was working. And it wasn't in a critical way. And then I just believed so much in the problem, in the product, that I thought, you know what, I think I can help solve this problem in the industry by working with the company. And it just kind of hit me. And then I had the fortune of doing a little consulting with the company in 24, got to know the chair of the board in early 25. And there you go. I just, I felt, and you and I had this conversation before. I think for some companies, it's beneficial to have someone maybe who has the background that I have to come help their company grow, because you really need to learn to think like a customer as an organization to be successful, especially when you're earlier in your journey of an organization. So that's what it was just little things over time that I watched and started thinking about, man, I'd like to go do that. It'd be so different. So there you go.
That's awesome. So the moment that kind of stopped you was actually on the ward. What did you see that made you realize that kidney monitoring was broken?
Ah, that's a great question. I wish I could actually play the movie. So I'm gonna see if I can describe it. So there's a Dr. Sisk. She's a PhD CRNA. Asked me to spend time with her in our big hospital in Charlotte and in the OR. And I call it the bunker. It's not really what you're supposed to call it, probably. But I was at the head of the bed and I got to see open hearts and big jaw replacement surgeries. And I'm standing here and I have all these monitors around me and all the wires. And the anesthesiologist is watching all the vitals of this patient's heart and lungs constantly, fluid inputs. And Christine did something very interesting. She said, "Look under the bed. That's what I have to know what's going on with the kidneys," which is a gravity dependent fluid system that started being marketed in 1936 by C.R. Bard. And I said, "What?" Like, because I already knew there was kind of a problem. And she said, "Yeah, Todd, it's completely manual." She said, "All the other vital organs are digitized, their vitals are digitized, but that's what we have to do." Then we went up to the floor to the cardiothoracic intensive care unit. Same story. She showed me a gravity dependent Foley that still had urine stuck in it. Head of the bed's the same, everything that's going on. But with that, it's completely manual, puts a lot of burden on the nurses. The doctors don't have the fluids. measures that they need. And that movie of the contrast between technology that had been designed for understanding what's going on with the heart, the lungs, even the brain was so far advanced. And then you look at like, oh my gosh, we're using a blood test that was never intended to be a kidney marker, and we're using a gravity dependent system. Why are we doing that? And that day, that immersive day, we had many of those, but that first immersive day hit me like, this makes no sense to me. And so I went on a journey with them because the doctors asked me to do it. And I don't want to go too far in the story, but I could tell you there's a moment where she looked at me and it really challenged me to do something. But
Okay.
that was it, seeing it in real life.
Well, that's awesome. So did you start with that problem and then go and look for a technology, or did the technology find you through Accuryn?
That's really interesting. I actually learned about the technology in 2016, right before it had FDA 510K clearance. But your question is really, really interesting. I would meet with all these companies over the years, Henry, and I kept a list of all the companies that I met with. And I had a column. I have to send this to you. I had a column as like, what problem are they dealing with? And then if there's a service line, for instance, is it heart? Is it oncology? Is it OB? Where do they play? And so, you get all these companies reaching out to you, but if you don't have the diagnosis of the problem, you shouldn't have the prescription. And so I would just keep a list. And when this surfaced for us, we were actually doing a lot of work looking at dialysis. And we decided to zoom out past the procedure and look at the organ. It's a really interesting, different dynamic to follow that kidney. And when I learned of the problem, I went back to my spreadsheet because I remembered a company. It was just like, I remember there was something. And so I emailed the CEO. And so we had the diagnosis before we had the prescription. Although I already knew of the company, it wasn't like I had this company and I called a doctor and said, hey, are you interested? We had a diagnosis of the problem, and then we found the right prescription.
So we were talking a little bit earlier about understanding the customer. We have a lot of medical device CEOs in this listenership.
Yeah.
So the question I want to ask is, are lots of US-based hospitals like yours attacking these problems as aggressively as you were thinking of tackling them, going and finding problems within the hospital system and trying to find the technology to fix them? Or is this a case that you were on the team were quite forward-thinking in your approach to try and solve these issues?
Oh, um, the reason I hesitate I'm going to answer it. I don't want to imply that I'm a forward-thinking person, although I would like to believe I am, and that other people aren't. You and I had this conversation earlier that I think what you were offering was so spot on to performance of organizations. We had a system that we called Design for Impact. My innovation team and I did. And we had a process. And one of the very first steps in that process is contextual understanding. And so we would spend an enormous amount of time. You could even go up a level and call that the diagnosis phase. We spent a lot of time interacting with the people in the context of the problem, the people who are affected by the problem, like the financial P&L owners, the patients. And so, do I think we were forward thinking? Yes. But I also believe that we were successful with it because we had a system that helped us go deep, deep, deep into the understanding. And when you do that, my opinion is a lot of the change management actually happens without calling it that. Because if you get a contextual understanding of the problem, it's just like you working with a client and you understand the context of their company very deeply. You're very good at this. And the questions that you've even asked me, I thought, oh my gosh, he's really looking to understand us deeply. If you do that really well, you can be very successful. I think the forward thinking part was saying we need a system to guide us versus trying to act as if we're brilliant people, because I think that often is a crutch or it's a mistake. So yes, we were very active in doing diagnostic work to make sure we got the diagnosis right before we got the prescription chosen.
Okay. Well, I love that. And I think the diagnosis before prescription, like we call our discovery process, it's our diagnostic to understand the problem before we recommend any solution, because you can't fix something that isn't necessarily broken. Or if you don't know the problem that you're trying to fix, then you're offering the wrong thing. So I think there's a few really real pieces of alignment between the way we think on this. What I'd like to kind of move into next is the reasons why this was even happening in the first place. So why have the kidneys been left behind while hearts, brains, lungs, it all got digitized over time?
Uh, when you look at the big procedures for hospitals and where hospitals are actually able to make enough money to stay afloat is really in the heart. And you have one heart, you have two kidneys. And I know it's an odd math thing, but if you lose the heart, you're in a lot of trouble. You can probably survive on one kidney, right? And so I think because of the money that flows into heart procedures and how it's paid, like what procedure do you do on the kidney? You do far more procedures on the heart. So I think, and I understand why the money flowed that way. And it needed to, and I'm glad it did. My dad had open heart surgery, and thank goodness for the amazing research and dollars that went into it, and the lungs too. But I think it was because people didn't really take the time to define or look at the vital sign of the kidney, which is really urine. It's not serum creatinine. It's not creatinine. It's not a blood test. And now that that's happening and you start to see the interplay of fluid dynamics and hemodynamics, I think that's why we're starting to see an uptick. But I really believe it was just financing, the ability to focus on things, and someone starting to ask really hard questions about why have we ignored the other vital organ. And it's okay, right? I mean, I think about it. We've gotten so good at heart procedures. Oh my gosh, the world is so good at it, and with lungs. And now it's the kidneys' time to shine, really.
Okay, that's cool. And so when we talk about the kidneys and what we're really measuring for, it's AKI is really what we're looking at. So why don't hospitals notice? Tell us a bit more about what AKI is. I'll let you define the
Oh,
problem and
great
take it from there.
question. You're one of the only people who've ever asked me about that acronym. So AKI stands for acute kidney injury, and the Center for Medicare, CMS, has defined acute kidney injury in the US as a hospital-acquired harm. And what it is when your kidneys are no longer able to filter the way that they're supposed to. Their performance has degraded. What happens? There are a lot of things that can cause it. Nephrotoxic drugs, all types of things. The issue that you have today in understanding kidney injury is there are two standards. One standard is a blood test. It's called a serum creatinine test. Few people know that the creatinine only shows up in the blood once your kidneys are performing at about only 60%. So your kidneys have to be 40% offended for them to not filter creatinine, which tells you that is not the vital sign or the marker of the kidney. If it's that late to the damn party, you're in trouble already. But if you really look at it, the kidney is a fluid mover. It's a filter. It's a garbage type system, right? And urine is the vital sign. And that's the other standard. But why hasn't urine been used as globally as the really definer, but blood has been? Is because today you still use a gravity dependent system and you use the blood test to know what's going on with the kidneys. And so now what we've done is we've literally digitized the kidney. So we never let urine get stagnant. We don't put pressure on the bladder, but we always sweeping that line so that urine doesn't get stagnant. You don't get intraluminal infections. But Henry, you asked such a great question. I'm trying to make a very simple answer. If you have accurate fluid outputs, literally by the minute, you're watching the performance of the kidney continuously, basically. And if the fluids aren't moving the way they're supposed to, and there's a global standard for how much you should produce, then it starts to indicate that the kidneys are in trouble, that they're beginning to get injured. The blood test says they are injured. And so what we do is we move up at least 12 hours before the blood test can tell you anything, to tell you that the acute kidney injury is beginning to happen, not that it has happened. That's the distinctive difference. And the reason that it's becoming super important is in the US alone. I mean, around the world, there are like 13 million acute kidney injuries known of every year. But in the US last year, 1 every 10 seconds. And so it's a massive problem financially for hospitals. Your length of stay is higher. People come back to the hospital more often. And what's really sad is a lot of those people who get an inpatient acute kidney injury wind up having chronic kidney disease. So it's a deep burden to them personally, but it's also a deep burden financially. But that's what acute kidney injury is. It's just when the kidneys cannot perform. And really what you're looking for is a signal that they're getting in distress because they're the most sensitive organ in the body. They're literally the mirror to the patient's health in the ICU. So the
Wow.
earlier you know, the better.
Why is it a mirror? Like, give me an idea of how we know it's a mirror. What's the thing that we're tracking with it that shows everything that's going on? And yeah, give us me a bit of an idea about that.
Urine.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. So I was meeting with an intensivist a month ago, 5 weeks ago, and he was very frustrated because he would come into the ICU early in the morning and he wouldn't have accurate fluid outputs. This is the movie, Henry, that we talked about. And he needed fluid outputs because he knows how much fluid's going in. If he doesn't have accurate fluid outputs, how does he know the fluid status of a patient?
Mm.
And the reason that is the kidneys will stop performing sooner, basically, than the heart or the lungs. It's the indicator that something's going wrong in the hemodynamics of the body. They're very, very sensitive organs. But if you try to use a blood test, they're not sensitive to the blood test, but the urine part is very sensitive. And then he told me something that really bothered me, but he had to do it. He said, sometimes we actually have to write up the nurses, meaning write a complaint that they didn't get accurate fluid outputs for us. Well, the nurses are so busy. An ICU nurse often has 100 tasks per hour. And that's why it's so important to digitize that manual part of their job so that when the intensivist walks into the ICU early in the morning where it's still kind of quiet and needs fluid outputs, he can just have it in the electronic medical record. And if it's in the electronic medical record and he could prioritize the patients based on fluid status versus putting the pressure on the nurses. But that's why knowing fluid output is so important, because the kidney's so sensitive, it will stop performing very early, and it's an indication that other bad things are coming.
Absolutely. And I was researching some stats before this. So on AKI, it actually leads to around 300,000 deaths a year and at a cost of $10 to $24 billion. So this problem is massive. How much of a dent do you think Accuryn can put into those numbers? And how much of that with the right technology do you think could be avoided?
That's a great question. Let me share some math. In general, what research says is you have 3 stages of acute kidney injury, basically. Stage 1, 2, 3. About 70% can go into stage 1 and then 20 to stage 2 and then 10% to stage 3. And about 5% of cardiothoracic surgery patients go to dialysis, and that's a big no-no. There's research that says you can prevent 60% of the people who are in stage 1 from going to stage 2 if you get an early indication of kidney distress. And so we have a paper from Northwestern. Now, it's a smaller paper, 27 or 29 patients, where because we gave accurate fluid outputs and an alert to kidney distress on the monitor, that the doctor was able to prevent every patient from going to a worse stage of acute kidney injury. Now, would that hold everywhere? No. But if we only prevented 10% of it, think about the billions of dollars saved and the kidneys saved. So a lot of it depends on, if we give you the information, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah. What's the action?
We tell you.
what's the action that's taken when it pings? It says there's an alert, they're going to move on the stages. What happens next in that treatment for the patient?
Boy, that's a great question. So what we're really giving you an indication to, I would argue, is a fluid status for an intensivist. I'm thinking about it in the ICU. Okay. So let's say that Dr. Norton is in the ICU and we saw it and you get an alert, then you know if your patient's not producing enough fluids or if they're producing too many, but it's usually not enough. What they'll often do is give a diuretic so that it can get fluids moving, force the body to do it. Sometimes they'll give a medication that ups the pressure in the heart to push fluids better. So really what the reaction to is a fluid management approach to where they say, okay, here's the fluid status of the ins and the outs. What is that telling me about the hemodynamic profile? And there are a bunch of different levers that they can pull. Often quite common is they give a diuretic to get the fluids off of you to keep them moving. Because with us, since we're sweeping it every minute, it's like, hey, wait a minute, things aren't moving.
Yeah.
And then doctors know exactly what to do. And that's the cool thing about this, Henry, is what we're here for is to give the clinical teams accurate and reliable processes and data to make decisions. Go from highly variable to the way it is today with a blood test or with a gravity dependent system to something that's so highly reliable that they can really inform better clinical decisions on. That's why we exist. If we can do that, the clinical teams will do their incredible work. They just will.
Awesome. Awesome. And I'm glad we've really framed the problem and the understanding of where this actually sits and why there's such a big challenge around this. So let's move forward into the technology side of things. So how does the SmartFoley actually work in terms potentially people who are non-medical listeners could actually understand?
Oh, non-medical listener. How would I equate this? Oh, okay, I'll equate this. Imagine you have a hose, okay? And you have a hose that has a dependent loop in it, a loop that's just like this. Fluids can't move. And if fluids get stuck here, they put back pressure toward the source, okay? So what we do is we actually pull air up through one of the tubes in our catheter, and we have air that sweeps the urine. So imagine having a hose that doesn't just have one tube, like the common garden hose, which is actually what a Foley catheter is. It's kind of a common garden hose. But imagine that hose having 3 or 4 tubes, but one of the tubes is to pull air to a certain point and then to sweep air through the hose so that the fluid keeps moving. It's really propulsion. If you think about it, the only way to overcome gravity is with propulsion. And so we use purified air with no pressure on your bladder to sweep it. So it's just like if you had that for a hose, you're just sweeping fluids through. So infections or mold won't build up in your hose. It's the same with urine. We just use simple air. It's what we call active drain line clearance. It's our patented FDA cleared solution. And that's how it works. If you just think about a dependent loop in a hose, we completely remove that because we use purified air with no negative pressure on your body to keep fluids moving. And if you do that, then you know what you're producing. You know how much is in the bucket accurately, which is just fantastic. There's one more thing we do, these really smart catheters. So today, to get intra-abdominal pressure, the gold standard is in the bladder, but it's all manual today. It's so manual. You have to pull a catheter, put a new one in, flush fluids into the bladder. That's really not efficient and it's very hard to do. So what we built was a catheter with a really smart, I call it a little bubble that sits in your bladder and senses that pressure 100 times a second.
Wow.
So just think about a sensor on your car, think about a sensor on your brain, like an EEG type, et cetera. We're doing the same thing to sense and digitize the pressure inside your bladder. Why is that important? Because we can give the doctors and the nurses the trend of pressure, not a spot check.
Mm.
It's the trend. And if your trend of pressure is going up, they know what to do. But if they don't know, it's all suspicion. And so that's why our catheters are so unique, is because we do something that no one else is doing, and we've patented it so that we can be the only people to do it. It just digitizes things, Henry. It just automates it and digitizes it for our clinical teams.
Amazing. So you've
Really, actually is pretty amazing.
it is.
I was fortunate to find it, frankly.
Yeah. But you obviously did find it. So it was a year ago that you joined the company kind of officially in 2025. Before this, what is the actual founding story behind the company? How did the technology come to be?
Oh, man, I'm glad you asked that question. Dr. Dan Burnett was a resident, I believe, at the Mayo Clinic. He got a call in the middle of the night that a patient couldn't pass fluids. He said, okay, I'll be there like 7 in the morning. Dan gets there. And by the way, Dan's an amazing guy. Dan gets there and the bed is soaked, but the catheter's still in. And because you get these dependent loops, there was so much urine stuck in this gravity-dependent system that there was back pressure on the bladder. There was more pressure going back to the patient than to draining the fluids, so the bladder couldn't clear. And because there was so much pressure, urine was leaking out around the catheter and soaking the bed. And Dan tells the story. He said, I thought, wait a minute, this makes no sense. This should not be the case. How could we make sure that we never get retrograde urine, stagnant urine? And then that's when he started thinking about this. And one of the original product designers, Rich Keenan, is still on our team. And so they thought, I need to digitize that vital sign of the kidney, and I need to keep it moving so I accurately know what's going on. That's the story. Literally, a doctor in residency felt really bad that the bed got soaked. And then he realized that it wasn't the nurse's fault. It wasn't anyone's fault other than a really faulty, archaic, gravity-dependent system.
Wow. I want to take a minute to say thank you to our sponsors, TTP. TTP is a leader in complex medical device development. With deep scientific and engineering expertise, they help medtech teams crack tough development challenges and make the right calls early, reducing rework, delays, and uncertainty later on. Whether you're navigating uncharted technical territory or racing towards market, TTP brings clarity and real-world judgment to the decisions that shape performance, usability, and manufacturability. By retiring risk early and grounding innovation in real-world constraints, they help you move forward with speed and confidence. To find out more, check out the show notes.
So, by the way, there's a lot to be said when a doctor or nurse creates something because they know the problem in context. And it goes back a little bit, Henry, to our earlier dialogue. It's what you do with your clients. You want to go understand the internal struggle to their company.
Yeah.
And so you dive deep into the movie of their struggle, right? You do. It's why you're so good at what you do and why you're able to match great talent and the right talent to the right problem and context. It's the same when someone experiences a problem and designs a product to fix it, they know it in depth.
Yeah.
And so Dan and Rich and team did an amazing job. It's quite amazing.
There's a lot of instances, and I appreciate the comments as well, but there's a lot of instances where there's a technology trying to find a problem. But when you start with a problem and build the technology around it, if it doesn't fix the problem, you know that that technology is not going to work really. And I know there's things where companies pivot on a, hey, we found this application for this technology, which we didn't even think of to start with. But when you start with the problem, stay fixated on that problem, it can create some very cool things. So, I mean, where it's got to now is 100,000 catheters shipped around the world. Yeah, lots of hospitals who have got this technology. So
Yep.
What I want to understand is where next? Where do you want to take this to? What comes next from Accuryn, and what can we expect to see?
Yeah, you're right. We're just went over 135,000 catheters. Th- that is a great question. And I want to get to the root of where I want this to go. I want us to be the standard for managing the kidney. I believe we're a kidney management platform. And so, just like you've had monitors for the heart and you've had catheters for the heart, I believe we're the same answer to the kidney. So, where I want this to go is we no longer talk about gravity dependent systems for managing the kidney's vital signs. We no longer talk about manual work to get intra-abdominal pressure, but that we basically say the default for managing the kidney part of the hemodynamic system is Accuryn. But where I really want that to go, truly, is a significant reduction in harm to patients and a significant reduction in the manual and the cognitive burden that doctors and nurses go through to try to take better care of you. If we get to that route, Henry, we're going to grow even faster than we grew last year. But I want us just to become a default standard for understanding the vital sign and the performance of the kidney versus the archaic solutions we give to clinical teams today.
Yeah. And how are you going to make that a reality? What are the things you're building? What are the steps that you're taking as a CEO of a company trying to do that?
Great question. You did a wonderful job, and thank you, of highlighting this concept of diagnosing first. Because I worked inside of a hospital system, I lived it. It's hard. Hospitals have a very difficult job. They have so many demands on their money and so many demands on their time. So the way that I believe we need to approach it is very empathetically, is where we work with them and we understand their problem. And then there's a layer to this that I think is really significant. Hospitals truly need to understand their acute kidney injury data. There are codes for this. And the first and most important thing is the diagnosis of the counts. Like, how many did you have last year? How many patients were harmed? And so the way that I like to approach it is very much in a partnership way, like, hey, we're here to help you. Like, that's the only reason we exist. And if you pull your data, let's really get into a great conversation around why does your data look that bad? And back up in the movie to help you see that you use a gravity dependent system and a lagging test. And I'm not saying that they're not seeing it, but a lot of times when it's all you've known for decades, for 90 years, does do you become blind to it? Do you just think that's kind of the default way it is? And so that's what we're really doing. We're just partnering with them. We're partnering with the intensivists and the nurses and the CFOs and the chief quality officers to say, look, let's just talk about the dynamic of the problem. And then here's how we believe we can partner with you and help you solve it. That's really our approach, is we're just here to help you. We know it's going to help you take better care of people. We also know it's going to save you an incredible amount of money. And so let's just get in a conversation and work together to do it. I'm not here to sell you. I'm here to help you solve a bad problem.
Do you find that because it's been a standard of care for so long, since the 1930s, that people accept that and they're just like, well, this is how it's done? And do you get a lot of pushback because of that? Or can you overcome that with the objection handle that you just shared?
We get some of that to where, how do we know that what you offer is actually better? That is a very fair question. And the reason that I believe it's a very fair question is not that I believe that the teams just are so wed to the status quo that they don't want to change. I think there's some people that are that way, but I don't think the doctors and the nurses in the context are. I think sometimes it's people who don't know that, who do that. So yes, we get some of that. And so then what I like to have the conversation is, okay, then pull your data. And if your current solutions got you to this problem, how do you believe those current solutions are going to get you out of the problem? Like, how does that work? And there's typically not a good answer to that. And so we used to do trials in hospitals, but we've done so many treatments now. We have so many studies and FDA clearance that we basically just say, just start small. Start small with us. Pick one cardiothoracic ICU or neuro ICU, track the data and literally just prove it. This thing works. That's the best way to overcome kind of the status quo. Don't ask someone to just completely remodel their house. Just start in one area, see what you think. That's the way to overcome it. Because I'm not trying to, in any way, Henry, be critical of hospital systems. I understand the pressures. What I am critical of, though, and I'll be very candid, because I worked at a hospital system, I can say this. If you're saying no, just to wield your power of no, without being curious, without remembering that the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm, then if you're protecting the status quo and okay that harm is still happening to patients, come on, that's not right. And I don't think doctors or nurses do that. You sometimes have people who haven't gone deep enough into the diagnosis. With that being said, then isn't that our job to work with them to help them really understand something that they may not see? And this is where the partnership comes into play. It's just like you partnering with your company you're collaborating with. You're there to help them solve their problem.
Mm.
And sometimes you need to help them see if their talent acquisition process is not as refined as it needs to be, not as pinpointed, not as rigorous, then you help them see that. And so I don't just sit there and say, oh, they're just clueless. I often ask, like, what else do we need to do to help them see that this is a real patient problem and it's a problem for them financially? And so I'm very irascible with the status quo, but I think it's more important to remain empathetic and patient and keep working with them to help them see, like, you know what? We really are a safe purchase. We're the only FDA cleared thing.
Yeah.
We've got multiple studies. We've shipped 130,000 catheters. Trust me, you're going to be okay. This is a great decision. I've made the decision before. I know I would have never risked my career in spending money if it didn't work.
So on your transition from health system to Accuryn, were you expecting that to be a challenge at all? What you've just described, were you expecting this stepping in because you'd seen other health systems act like this already? Or was it something that was a new challenge and you were like, hey, this is surprising. I didn't quite realize this is how it is.
Oh, what a great question. Um, it's funny you ask. So I'm publishing a book later this year called The Innovator's Journey, which was my experience of being an innovator inside of a big health system and at GE for a little while. And I've been thinking about writing a book about the experience of switching from a big health system to being a CEO. I knew it would be hard. The reason that I knew it would be hard is because I've met with probably 1,000 healthcare startups in my 15-year career of being inside of a health system. And I saw what they did and I saw how hard it was. And then I would sit in capital allocation meetings and I would see how hard it was for health systems to buy. So I walked in knowing, I think, Henry, that it would be hard. Have I been surprised by how hard it is at times? Yeah. Yeah. I've been surprised by it because to me it's obvious because I lived the problem. I saw it in the OR and the ICUs. Um, but I've also enjoyed it. You learn a lot when you go through the tough stuff. And I I really just want to make it work. My wife nicknamed me Captain Kidney. Okay. Because I'm so committed to solving the problem. Um, but yeah, it's been hard. There've been a lot of surprises. The
Yeah.
pace. I think the great way to explain it is the how long the buying cycle is now. COVID blew up everything. Value analysis teams are methodical and slow, and contracts are so complicated that the buying cycle is longer than I thought it would be or estimated it to be. And so you got to get prepared for that when you're managing the cash of a company, et cetera. But yeah, man, there've been a lot of really rewarding days. Um, and there've been days that have been very frustrating. Maybe some of the most rewarding days, I'll send you a picture of this. A nurse gave one of our field nurses a pen. They made 30 pens that said, somebody go get the Accuryn.
Okay.
And this was a nurse.
Yeah.
And what that told me is we were solving a problem for the people taking care of the people, and they wanted it. They wanted it as part of their solution. Those are the days where you think, okay, we're we're being good citizens of healthcare. We're not just building stuff to your point to try to sell devices. We're literally making lives better for people taking care of people.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And what on your side have you had to learn through this journey? So obviously it's different skill sets being a CEO of a health system versus being in a startup of a scale up even medical device company. But what have you had to learn or relearn or change old about yourself since you started with Accuryn?
Oh, wow. What a question. Uh, I've had to learn far more about raising money, cap tables, valuations, preferred, common, all the regulations around raising money. I've had to learn how to stay calm, truly. It's very hard when you're in the midst of it and you're trying to grow a company. And you may have experienced this in your company to where you have to manage your team and your cash so closely that you're only spending time and money on the essential things. And that has helped me learn how to even better design teams. I would really love your brain on that too. So when you think about what's the most essential thing the company needs to do and how do you get the team focused on doing that in an environment where you're raising money, et cetera, versus in a multi-billion-dollar company where someone hands you a budget every year.
Yeah.
That's a skill, but really staying optimistic is a skill. And so one thing I do every morning is I spend 14 minutes and 24 seconds. That's 1% of your day in quiet time on a yoga mat. Just saying, okay, what are we going to do today? Being optimistic, keeping the mind focused on what can we do versus what are all the problems, like what can we go do today? There's so many things I've learned, and it's reinforced to me to never pass along the pressure. If you have the pressure, don't be disrespectful to someone else because you have the pressure. Be good to your team, motivate them, be honest and authentic, but don't pass along pressure to people just because you have it. Learn to manage it. And don't pass along that pressure to your customer. Always remain as a partner with them. Be empathetic to them, collaborate with them, talk to them, stay in dialogue with them. And sometimes that's very different to your point inside of a system versus being outside of a system. I don't want to go on too long, but man, I've learned so many things that are unique that I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to learn. It's amazing.
Absolutely. I'd like to just go back to one thing which is less on the journey now. So that yoga mat. When did you start sitting on a yoga mat and why was it 13 minutes and 24 seconds? Where does that come from?
14 minutes and 24 seconds. I started it over a year ago um, because I think mental strength is incredible. So I have an older son who plays professional baseball, a daughter in medical school, and a younger son who plays professional baseball. And one thing I deeply admire about them is their mental skills. I mean, look, I've been fortunate to be their dad, but they, and so I look at them and what they go through, and you got to build a skill to handle this. And so then I kept hearing about all this 1% stuff, Henry, get 1% better every day. And I'm thinking that is utterly impossible because if you compound 1% every day, that means you're twice as good as you were like 60 days in. Like, no way. And so then I don't know what hit me. I said, well, what's 1% of my day? And so I said, hey, Siri, how many minutes and seconds is 1% of my day? And it's 14 minutes and 24 seconds. And so I said, okay, if I spend 1% of my day focused on being better, building a better skill set, building the ability to think deeper about a problem. Sometimes I'll sit on my yoga mat even 2% of the day when I'm trying to think through how to better approach a problem. But some days I just say, okay, how do I calm and level myself for the day? And that's where the 1% came from, is I kept reading about this 1% better every day, and I thought it was BS. But I thought allocating focused, deep 14 minutes and 24 seconds every day to stay optimistic, to stay focused, would really pay off for me, and I think it has.
That's so cool. I fully buy into the theory of marginal gains and the 1%. The 1% is these small little things that compound over time, and it's not about the big, huge thing. It's it's the small minutiae of each individual step that start to then get the traction and get the wheels spinning and moving forward. So I really buy into it. But the mindfulness thing as well, I think it's very underrated. It's very easy in the world of business to get so caught up in the day-to-day of what you do, taking the time for yourself to understand yourself, where you're going with a business, what you're thinking about, and also what's coming towards you, and being able to actually process that. When you do it over day and day and day, you suddenly start to notice you can perform better. But it is cool. I love that. I think that's so cool.
Because I think it's this, I think managing ourselves, you run a company, you started a company. Amazing. You're doing well. Amazing. Because you're delivering value to the market in the right way. Just the way you've explained to me how you think about it is just as a CEO of a company, and I led a team of 400 people at McKesson. The way that you position yourself to your customer and you think with them and partner with them, to me, is really the right way to do it. When you sit with yourself to learn the skill set of managing your emotions, how do you stay calm in a storm? How do you stay focused? How do you keep a team focused? How do you solve a problem? I believe it's a skill set. And I love how you said these little marginal gains of building that skill set every day, hopefully makes me a better empathetic leader and kinder to the people around me. Cause look, man, if we sold this company and I made stupid money, but I had a reputation of not being good to the people around me, I would not want that. Keep your money.
Mm.
I never want pressure to change how people ought to be treated,
Yeah.
whether it's a customer, whether it's employee, whether it's my family. So I do that a lot just so I can be who I should be, whether it's a CEO or a husband or a dad or a friend. You know, I think it's a skill. I love how you talk about it. Little marginal improvements every day will hopefully help us always pursue being better.
We'll come back in a year and see where we're both at. Hiss.
Yeah, well, that'd be so much fun.
It will-
And I've got to come see you because one of my teammates is going to be in, I don't think it's London, but they're going to be in UK next week for a big conference because we're working with a distributor there in the NHS. Um, and so maybe in a year I'll come over before, and you and I can, sit down and have a great dialogue. And, I also want to learn from you. I would love to almost do a reverse interview, Henry, in that we get caught up in my role, and in people in roles like mine. We get so caught up in trying to make the company perform, right? That if we had even a better framework for how to sit back and think about the dynamics of our team and how to design not just the team of today, but what do you think your forecast is in a year? What should your team look like in a year? And not to do it because this person's asking for that person, or that, but to methodically, I would love to learn at some point how you think about it. And then, maybe that could lead to something really cool between the two of us as we build this out. Because I want to build a high performing company. And without high performing people, you'll never have a high performing company.
100%. I completely get all of that.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to one thing you said though. If you get the exit for stupid money and you get it, what happens next? Are you going to find another problem to try and solve? Do you already know the problem that you want to solve? Or is it time to just take the time off, play some golf? I can see a picture in the background that suggests you might. What's next for you?
Okay, I've thought about three things. Um, I've built a solution that helps train reaction speed for athletes. And I would love to build that business because I love sports and human performance so much. So would I want to be the CEO of it? I don't know. Um, the other kind of, I would say, dream I have of something I really want to do is when my daughter becomes an ENT surgeon, I want to be in the OR with her, whether it's, handing her a suction tube or handing her a scalpel. That's one of my dreams is to get to do that some. So I don't know what type of qualification I have to do, but I just dream of being in the OR with Emma and hopefully having an Accuryn on the floor to assist him in knowing perfusion in the OR. The third thing is I just want to travel with Wendy. I want to, go to my boys' baseball games. Hopefully they're in the big leagues and, so go from the OR to the field and then go to Italy or the UK or somewhere and spend time with Wendy. So I think it'll be a bit of a mixed bag. And then I really want to give back. I really want to give back. I want to help other CEOs know how to like go through the struggles and not necessarily just to make the money, but just to give back in some way to the world in a way that lifts people out of really bad struggles. I really hate it. I mean, it's a hard job or any other type of cause that I could spend time doing. I don't want it just to be about building companies or going on vacations, but, sitting with Wendy and saying, okay, where are we going to spend our time to go give back, pay it forward in a way that's really meaningful for somebody?
Incredible. Well, Todd, look, I've had an incredible amount of fun today on this conversation.
You're awesome, man. You asked such great questions. Like, oh my gosh, like this, we could just go on forever just because you do such a great interview.
Look, I appreciate that a lot. I've done enough of these now to hopefully have been 1% better every time to get to this stage. So there's still lots to learn. But talking of learning, my final thing I want to bring it round to is if the listener wants to learn more about Accuryn, the company, where do they go and where can they find out that information?
It just very little happens outside of dialogue. Sometimes I say, go to our website, email me. I'll give you, is it okay if I give my email?
Please share. Yeah.
T Dunn, TDUNN at Accuryn.com, ACCURYN.com. Let's just have a dialogue because I think sometimes in the digital world, we forget that we can actually still talk to each other and like we are.
Yeah.
So just reach out. We'll find time to have a dialogue, anything we can do to serve those people in solving a big problem for patients and hospitals. That's why we're here. That's why we're here.
It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, man, you're awesome. Have a great one. Good to see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Crux of MedTech podcast. If you're not already doing so, please go ahead and subscribe on YouTube or follow the podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Crux. Crux is a medtech search firm which places pioneers in transformative roles to help us live longer, healthier lives. We do three things for companies. We help hire world-class executive talent. We help companies raise investment from Series A to Series C and execute upon M&A. And we also are building a community of medtech leaders to facilitate peer-to-peer learning and accelerate the companies to help them go faster. If you're interested in any of those three things, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or follow the link in the show notes to find out more. Thank you.